She didn't carry the rifle in a case. That was the first thing they noticed. No padded hard shell, no foam-lined aluminum box with combination locks, and a manufacturer's logo embossed on the lid. Just a worn canvas sleeve, faded from dark olive. To something closer to the color of dried sage, cinched with 2 leather straps that had been resoled so many times, the original material was anyone's guess. She slung it over one shoulder the way a rancher carries a fence post. Without ceremony, without announcement, like it was part of her anatomy.
What kind of person walks into a field like this, carrying a weapon like that, and expects to belong?
Registration?
Here.
Her name was Nara Sundown. 31 years old, Apache descent, born and raised on a stretch of high desert in southern New Mexico that most maps didn't bother labeling. She wore civilian clothes, broken-in work boots, canvas pants, a plain grey thermal under a canvas jacket the colour of old bone. No patches, no pins, no insignia of any kind. When the registration volunteer at the check-in table asked her which division she was entering, she said quietly, "Open." The volunteer blinked. Open division. That's the unrestricted class. You sure? Yes, Nara said. The volunteer looked past her to the line of competitors behind her. Decorated veterans, active duty marksmen, sponsored civilian shooters with rigs that cost more than most people's vehicles.
All right, bench is secure, bipod down. Wind reads 5 right. Keep an eye on the flag.
Ready when you are.
Then she looked back at Nara, wrote down the name, handed over a numbered bib. Nara folded it and put it in her jacket pocket without looking at it. The Barrett M82A1 is not a hunting rifle. It is not a sport rifle in any conventional sense.
Just get ready.
It is a semi-automatic anti-material weapon system chambered in .50 caliber BMG. A round originally designed to punch through engine blocks and light armor at distances where other rifles have already given up.
Wind out of the north-northwest, steady 8 miles per hour, range is clear.
Adjusting to target 1.
The barrel alone is 29 inches. Fully loaded, the system weighs close to 30 pounds. Most competition shooters use a bench rest, a bipod, and a rear bag just to manage the recoil. At distances beyond 1,500 meters, the physics involved stop being intuitive and start being the domain of specialists with computers and weather stations.
Are you sure we should use that?
Nobody at the Harlan Plains Open Championship had seen anyone carry one in a canvas sleeve. Sergeant First Class Doyle Breck was already on the line when Nara set up. He was the kind of man who filled a space just by standing in it. Broad through the chest, square through the jaw, with forearms like bridge cables and the quiet, deliberate movements of someone who had spent decades being absolutely certain of himself.
Competitors, today's challenge distance is set at 500 meters.
He had won the Open Division 3 times in the last 6 years. His rifle was a custom bolt-action 253 chassis system with a hand-lapped barrel and a thermal sleeve, zeroed with meteorological data pulled that morning. His spotter held a Kestrel wind meter and a ballistic calculator the size of a tablet.
2 miles. 2 miles. 2 miles is the distance. You've got this.
Doyle looked at Nara's setup. Then he looked at Nara. "You need a bench?" he asked. Not rudely, almost helpfully, like he was asking someone if they needed directions. "No," she said.
Wind 7 knots. Elevation 10 clicks.
Copy. Dialing it in.
Ready? Stand by for the shot.
He watched her unfurl the canvas sleeve, expose the Barrett, begin assembling the bipod legs from memory, her hands moving with the kind of practiced patience that doesn't come from reading manuals. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not respect, not yet. Something more like recalibration. He turned back to his own line and said nothing more. The range master's voice crackled over the PA. "Competitors, today's challenge distance is set at 3,800 meters. Confirm your target designations. Stage 1 begins in 20 minutes. 3,800 meters, 2 miles, and nearly half a mile more."
It's still not lining up. The altitude is throwing everything off. I'm showing 3 mils, but that feels light.
The crowd murmured. A few of the competitors in the back rows went quiet. That distance wasn't unprecedented in long-range record attempts, but for a live fire competition with a single cold-bore shot per stage, it was as close to theoretical as practical shooting got. Doyle's spotter leaned in and muttered something. Doyle nodded, adjusted his data, kept working. Nara sat down behind her rifle and looked downrange. There was nothing out there, just flat, just pale gold grass and distant heat shimmer, and somewhere at the 2-mile mark and beyond, a steel plate the size of a car door. She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds.
I remember the first time I tried to control the wind and realized you don't. You listen, you wait. And if you're patient enough, it lets you in.
The plains don't lie. The grass bends with the wind, but it does not break. We are like the grass. Everything you see, from here to the mountains, requires patience. When the time comes, let the rifle guide your heart.
Then she opened them and began to read the wind. The Harlan Plains sit in a bowl of high desert geography that most shooting enthusiasts consider a nightmare and a handful of specialists consider a laboratory. The elevation is 4,600 feet above sea level, high enough to measurably reduce air density, low enough that competitors without altitude experience consistently miscalculate their hold. The terrain is deceptively flat. From the firing line, it looks like a billiard table. What it actually is a series of almost imperceptible terrain rolls, shallow undulations of 6 to 12 inches that create unpredictable micro-channel wind effects. The air doesn't move across Harlan Plains in a straight line. It wrinkles. The range master had posted the morning wind average at 11 miles per hour, variable from the northwest. That number meant almost nothing to anyone shooting past 2,000 meters. By the time a .50 caliber bullet travels 3,800 meters, it has been in the air for somewhere between 4 and 5 seconds. In 4 seconds, the wind can change direction twice and speed once. The bullet doesn't know that. The shooter has to know it before the trigger breaks. Nara lay behind the Barrett and watched a piece of dried grass 60 yards to her left. It bent, straightened, bent again at a slightly different angle. Her grandfather had taught her to read grass before he taught her to read words.
He didn't teach me how to shoot. He taught me how to see, and once you see, you don't miss the same way anymore.
The plains don't lie, he used to say. He was an old man by the time she knew him. with hands like carved mesquite, and a voice that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his chest. He had served in Vietnam as a combat marksman. Not a formal designation, just what his unit called him when they needed someone to reach out and resolve a problem at distances that made the other soldiers uncomfortable. He never talked about it in specifics. What he did talk about was the grass, the sky, the way pressure builds before a storm and releases in a way you can feel in the back of your throat if you pay attention. He had given her the Barrett when she turned 22. It had been his. He had acquired it through means he described only as a long story involving Fort Bliss and a very understanding quartermaster who owed me a considerable favor. She had never asked more than that. Now she pressed her cheek to the stock, the same stock her grandfather had worn smooth along the right side, and she let the wind tell her what it was doing. On the line beside her, Doyle was running his data. His spotter called a full-value wind call at 9 miles per hour, correcting for the elevated position of the target berm. It was a competent read, technically sound, built on instruments and algorithm and experience. Nara didn't use a calculator. She used a memory. Her grandfather's voice moved through her like a slow current. Wind doesn't blow the bullet. Wind negotiates with it. Your job is to understand the terms before the deal is made. She adjusted her elevation turret with 2 clicks, then one more. Settled her left hand under the rear of the receiver. Breathed in, breathed out, held at the bottom of the exhale, where the diaphragm is still and the body becomes a piece of earth.
Competitor 47, confirmed hit at extreme distance! Whoa! Did you hear that?
I knew she could do it.
The first stage whistle sounded. Doyle fired. The report was enormous. 50 caliber doesn't apologize for itself.
Harlan Plains target, stage 1, competitor number 47.
And the shockwave rolled back across the line like a physical thing. 8.5 seconds of silence. Then the distant ring of steel. A confirmed hit. The crowd acknowledged it with a murmur of appreciation. Doyle's spotter checked the data and nodded. Doyle sat up, cracked his neck once to the left, and glanced down the line. Nara hadn't moved. She was still at the bottom of her exhale. "She's not gonna shoot," someone behind the spectator rope said. "She's waiting," someone else said. "Look at her. She's just waiting." They didn't understand what she was waiting for. She was waiting for the grass to lie flat. It happened in a 2-second window. The grass went flat, not completely, just to something close to horizontal. And the shimmer at the 500-meter mark stilled for a moment that wouldn't last. Nara felt it before she fully understood it intellectually. The data was already in her body, processed through 31 years of open sky education that no curriculum had ever formally offered. She broke the trigger. The Barrett spoke. There is no other word for what a 50 caliber anti-materiel rifle does at full charge. It doesn't crack like a smaller rifle. It doesn't pop. It speaks. A single authoritative syllable that compresses the air and persuades the ground and makes every bird within a quarter mile reconsider its altitude. The round left the muzzle at just under 2,900 feet per second.
That's a Vietnam-era rifle.
Yes. Hand lap barrel?
My grandfather's work.
Not with the evaluating glance of someone sizing up competition. With something different.
I saw you use no instruments. Who taught you the wind call?
I just watched the grass.
You had your eyes on the grass from the moment I got there. That's a Vietnam-era rifle. It was not.
It rose slightly in the first 300 meters, following the ballistic arc. Then gravity began its conversation. At 1,000 meters, it had dropped several feet below the bore axis. At 2,000 meters, the drop was severe enough that if you could see it, it would look like the bullet was falling, not flying. At 3,000 meters, the air was thinner, and the crosswind had shifted 2 degrees back toward the west, which the bullet could not feel, but which had already been accounted for, not by a computer, but by a woman who had spent years watching how the high desert breathes. At 3,800 meters, the steel plate rang. The sound came back 4.5 seconds after the shot. It reached the firing line just as Nara was lifting her head. For a moment, nobody said anything. The rangemaster checked the spotter scope, checked it again, keyed his radio. Confirmed impact, he said. Harlan Plains target, stage 1, competitor number. He paused to check the bib number. Sur 47. Confirmed.
Then he extended his hand.
Then, very quietly, the crowd started. It didn't start as applause. It started as a kind of collective
We need additional
exhale.
information for the
The
official
sound
record.
a stadium makes when something happens
paperwork,
that
ma'am.
shouldn't have been possible. And everyone present knows it
Your background,
simultaneously.
competitive shooting history,
Then
and
2
military
or 3
service
people
record
clapped.
are needed.
And then more. And then the applause rolled back through the spectators like the wind across the grass.
Do you need my background record to file the submission? Or to decide if the record counts?
All right, it's time they knew.
Your background, competitive shooting history, military service record, if applicable. For context.
For the submission.
Understood. We'll proceed as requested.
Doyle lowered his spotting scope. He had been watching downrange when the ring came back. He had been watching because his spotter had said quietly, "She's about to go." And something in his spotter's voice had made him look. He turned and looked at Nara instead. She was running the bolt, ejecting the casing with the methodical calm of someone who has done this so many times that the celebration is beside the point. The brass tumbled and hit the ground. She caught it, held it in her palm for a moment. The case was warm, almost uncomfortably so, and slightly scorched at the primer pocket, and then set it aside on the rail of her bench, with a kind of deliberateness that said this was not a trophy. It was a receipt. That's a... Doyle's spotter started to say and stopped. 3,800 meters, the rangemaster confirmed over the PA. Cold bore, confirmed first round impact. That is a new range record for the Harlan Plains Open. The rangemaster paused. Then, in a tone that was considerably less official than anything he'd said all morning, he added, "That is also potentially a new Open Division American civilian long-range record, pending official measurement and submission." Doyle stood up slowly. He turned to look at Nara fully for the first time since check-in, not with the evaluating glance of someone sizing up competition, with something different, something that cost him something to show. She was already breaking down the Barrett, folding the bipod legs, loosening the scope rings with a small hex key she kept in her jacket pocket. "That's a Vietnam-era rifle," Doyle said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "Hand-lapped barrel? My grandfather's work." A long pause, the kind that fills itself. "Who taught you that wind call?" he asked. "You didn't use a meter. You didn't use a caulk. I watched you. You had your eyes on the grass from the time I got here." Nara wrapped the scope in a piece of flannel, set it in the sleeve beside the barrel. "He did," she said. "He was a marksman." "He was an Apache," she said. The marksman part came later. Doyle stood there for another moment. The crowd was still making noise behind the rope. Someone was trying to get a photo. The range master was on his radio, talking to someone official. Doyle looked at the canvas sleeve, looked at the brass casing sitting on the bench rail, looked at the space where 3,800 meters of open sky had just been successfully negotiated. Then he extended his hand. "Doyle Breck," he said. She looked at his hand, looked at him. "I know who you are," she said, and shook it. The competition official found her 40 minutes later. She was sitting at a folding table near the staging area, drinking coffee from a thermos, the canvas sleeve propped against the table leg beside her, like an old friend waiting for a ride home. He had a clipboard and an expression that suggested he had been sent by several people who had not agreed on what to say. "Ms. Sundown," he said, "we're going to need some additional information for the official record submission." "All right," she said. "Your background. Competitive shooting history." "Military service record, if applicable." He paused. "For context, for the submission." Nara set down the thermos cap. "Do you need it for the record?" she said. "Or do you need it to decide whether the record counts?" The official opened his mouth, closed it. She reached into her jacket pocket and set a single folded card on the table. Not her registration bib. Something else. He picked it up. He looked at it for a long time. The crowd noise from the range had softened to a distant hum. The wind moved across the plains in long, slow rolls, bending the grass and releasing it in patterns that looked almost like breath. Somewhere far out, 2 miles and then some, a steel plate sat in the afternoon sun with a .50 caliber impression punched cleanly through its center. There is a concept in long-range precision shooting that serious practitioners call reading the wind to zero. It refers to the ideal moment, the statistical outlier, when all the variables align briefly enough for the shooter to fire with the highest possible probability of success. It cannot be manufactured. It cannot be scheduled. It can only be recognized and then acted upon with a speed and decisiveness that most people confuse with luck. Her grandfather had called it something else, in the language his grandmother had spoken, and he had passed down to her in pieces over years, between stories and silences and long afternoons on the high desert watching the grass move. The concept translated roughly as the moment the land agrees with you. She had been waiting her entire life to find a range big enough to test it. The official looked up from the card. His expression had changed entirely. Whatever script he had arrived with had been quietly retired. "This will clear," he said. "I know," she said. He handed it back. She folded it and returned it to her pocket without ceremony, the same way she had registered that morning, the same way she had entered the line, the same way she had done everything since arriving at Harlan Plains, without announcement, without demand, with only the quiet authority of someone who had nothing left to prove to anyone, except perhaps a promise made over a rifle that belonged to a man who taught her that the wind doesn't lie. She picked up her thermos, took another sip. Across the range, Doyle Breck was still standing at the firing line, looking down range toward a steel plate he couldn't see from here. A new record had been set, the kind that gets entered into logs and referenced for years in competitions that hadn't happened yet. And somewhere in the high desert, the grass bent flat, held still for exactly 2 seconds, and then moved on. The same as it always had, the same as she always would. If someone in your life served and never made it to the podium they deserved, drop their branch in the comments. This one's for them. If that shot hit different, you already know what to do. The like button is right there. And don't go anywhere. The next story coming to this channel involves a woman, a mountain, and a decision that 3 generals still don't talk about. You're going to want to be here for that one.